for a thematic historic designation for wood frame houses in the West Grove that are associated with Bahamian or Southern American history. We've had 3 meetings before. The initial preliminary designation report went to the Historic Resources Preservation Board for review. The board recommended that staff proceed with the final designation report, which will go to the Historic Resources Preservation Board on July 3rd for their final determination. At the meeting, the board recommended that we do more community outreach, so that we try and explain the process again. We try and explain what historic designation means. We try and explain why we've chosen the properties that we have, and we allow you to ask us questions. The staff members that are here will be able to answer your questions. However, it is really the Preservation Board that makes the final determination on this designation. So please, if you have any questions on the process, or the properties that were chosen, or what historic designation might entail, we'll be more than happy to answer them for you. We hope that the presentation will explain a lot of it. We prefer to keep the questions to the end because you may have a question which we later go on to and provide an answer for the presentation. So please, let's try and keep the questions to the end. Let us go through the presentation, and we will answer everybody's question. We will try and get you out of here by 8:30, but we obviously will speak to everyone and answer everyone's questions before we go. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Vicki Toronto, Historic Preservation Planner with the City of Miami. And I'm going to start out the presentation, and we're kind of going to do it in conjunction. It's going to be Jeremy as well, and Warren, and we're going to be able to answer different questions. So let's start. Why the wood frame residences of Coconut Grove Village West? So as it had been mentioned, this particular multiple property designation is focusing on wood frame vernacular residences in Coconut Grove Village West. To summarize, the neighborhood is over 100 years old. It illustrates the incomparable legacy of the Bahamian and Southern African American community. There's approximately 50 parcels. Some of these parcels contain multiple structures, but there's approximately 50 parcels that potentially qualify for designation as historic resources. Additionally, the wood frame vernacular residences were built roughly between the 1910s and the 1940s. More specifically, why we are focusing on West Coconut Grove and Coconut Grove Village West, and what the narrative is we are trying to say here. As most of you know, if not all of you know, the history of Coconut Grove, it was settled before the City of Miami was incorporated. And later on, it was annexed by the City of Miami, and that's how it's now part of the City of Miami. Prior to that, there was, as the Monroes and everybody else started, the founders essentially, some of the other founders started coming in, and the Peacocks and started establishing businesses. You did have Bahamians that were coming up from the Bahamas and coming up through Key West. So they were coming here to help establish the local community and to work at the Peacock Inn. So this community, as many of you know, is still going strong. There are still multiple families that are still here that have been connected to these structures and to this community in general for multiple generations. Why these buildings? These buildings, history is more than just telling a story, not telling a story, but telling a narrative. There's more than books involved. There's more than oral history involved. It's also, these buildings are a physical manifestation of the community and the history. Their legacy, as they continue to be here, will be a reminder to the descendants of these continued families that have been here, and newcomers as they come along, as well as tourists, education in general, and telling the story of the history of Miami. In this area, we already have some designated sites. Right now, we do have the Evangelist Street, Charles Avenue, which was established in 1900, and it was designated in 2012 by the City of Miami. The Mariah Brown House. This is located at 3298 Charles Avenue, and this too is on the Miami Register of Historic Sites. This house, the EWF Stirrup House, is located at 3242 Charles Avenue. It's also on the Miami Register of Historic Sites. Then we have at 3250, this house is not designated, but it is the house of Alice Burroughs, who you can see her photograph there on the left. Warren, I'm going to ask you to jump in and kind of elaborate more on the rest of this topic.
Okay, so what is historic preservation? What we try to do in historic preservation are protect the most significant properties within communities. The properties that give communities their character, the properties that tell the history of the community, the properties that relate to the history and the long-standing families of the community. So historic preservation works, as far as we're concerned, alongside with new development. There is no reason that new development and historic preservation can't successfully work together, and that's been proven in cities throughout the country and throughout the world. The two processes can work hand in hand. So why historic preservation? We believe that when you retain properties that give a neighbourhood its character, you tell the history of that neighbourhood, you tell the story of that neighbourhood, and also you get variety within that neighbourhood. When someone builds new properties in historic neighbourhoods, we try and make sure they fit in with the historic properties in terms of scale, in terms of massing, in terms of design, and in some cases we are actually, we support modern design within historic districts. Just recently in the Palm Grove neighbourhood, we approved an application for a new house in a historic district, and it was of a very modern design. So the multiple property designation that we're actually doing at the moment, we have a number of ways we can designate properties as historic. We can designate them individually as one site, or we can designate a historic district, which effectively draws a boundary around the neighbourhood that has all the defining characteristics. Or this new way that we have is basically a sort of combination of both. What we do is we look for a particular type of property within a boundary, and the properties all must have a common theme. So basically here you can see the properties that we've identified as having the common theme of wood frame structures associated with Bahamian or South American history, and all within a defined geographical area and built within a defined point, a defined time period. So our criteria for designation, we have a number of criteria, but we feel these properties meet the following criteria. The properties exemplify the historical, cultural, political, economical and social trends of the community. They portray the environment in a neighbourhood history characterised by one or more distinctive architectural styles, and they embody the distinguishing characteristics of an architectural style or period or method of construction. So we feel that these properties meet these criteria because they're a very definite design. They are wood frame vernacular structures. They were normally designed by the residents who built the properties. They weren't designed by architects. They were built using local materials. They were built using traditional customs. So we feel that these houses, these properties, all meet these criteria. And again, I would suggest that if any of you are property owners and you believe that your houses don't meet these criteria, this is really what you should speak to us about, because this is really what we base our determination on. So if you feel that your property does not meet the criteria for the thematic designation, then that's what you should come forward to us and discuss with us. So wood frame vernacular structures, these are simple wood frame buildings. The product of the builder's construction experience available, and they're typically rectangular or balloon frame construction. They're 1 or 2 stories in height. They normally have horizontal weatherboard or drop siding, although there are some board and batten. Some early buildings do feature the board and batten style of construction. Wood double hung sash windows are typical, and the ornamentation is sparse, but you will have some ornamentation such as gable vents, wood trim, decorative balustrades on porches, decorative porch columns. So there's not a lot of decoration, but most of these properties incorporate at least 1 or 2 of these elements, and in some cases more. So the actual designation process, how do we go about carrying out a historic designation? The first thing we have to do is do a survey of the neighbourhood to determine what properties we believe visually may meet these criteria. So once we have that list of properties, we do further research into each individual property. We'll look at the construction, we'll look at the date of construction, we'll look at who built them, we'll look at who lived in them, and we'll do all of our background research to make sure that these properties actually meet the theme. We then hold community meetings with residents. so that we can discuss the designation process with them, so that we can get their feedback, so that we can hear of any concerns, and so that we can try and explain why we choose these particular properties and why we believe that they are eligible for the designation. So at these meetings, the public can give us their opinion, but they can also write into us, they can call us, they can come in and visit us at the office, and we're happy to sit down and speak with them. We hold further community meetings with residents and property owners of the properties. And then, as you heard, the preliminary designation report, which is basically a summary of our research, goes to the Historic Preservation Board for their determination, where they decide whether we should move ahead with the final designation or whether the application will go no further. So the board have directed us to move ahead with the final designation. So we are doing further research, we're doing further studies, and we're making sure that all the properties within this proposed designation absolutely meet the criteria. So what does designation mean? It means that certain alterations to your property are either reviewed by staff or the Historic and Environmental Preservation Board. So I'd like to dispel a few sort of myths and inaccuracies here. Number one, in 99% of properties we do not review the interior. So you can do what you want with the interior, your electrics, your plumbing, you can reconfigure the interior of the property, we do not review that. Can you paint your house? Yes, you can paint your house. Do we want you painting it green with purple stripes? No, we don't. We just want to make sure that whatever colour you paint your house fits in with the neighbourhood and the historic character of the property. Yes, you can put in impact windows. All we want to do is make sure that the lighting configuration of your impact windows is the same as the original configuration. So your house may have had 6 panes over 1, or 1 over 1, or 3 over 1, or 4 over 1. You can absolutely go ahead and put in impact windows of a similar operating style and design. Your roof, for most of these properties, in fact, I think the vast majority of them, they had asphalt shingle roofs. So yes, you can re-roof your property, and yes, if it was asphalt shingles that were originally there, that's what we will approve. Some alterations do have to go to the Historic Preservation Board. So additions which are visible from the right-of-way have to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Board. If an addition is not visible from the right-of-way, then staff can review and approve that. If you want to change your windows to a window pattern which wasn't traditional to the house, then the board will have to review and approve that. If you want to close up any windows or doors that are visible from the right-of-way, or open up new windows or doors visible from the right-of-way, that will have to go to the board. If it's not visible from the right-of-way, then staff can review and approve that. So even if you have to go to the board, staff is always available to sit down with you prior to submitting your application. We will sit down, we will work with you, we will advise you on what staff can approve. But if you really want to do something that staff can't approve, we will sit with you and walk you through the process for going to the Historic Preservation Board. You may have heard stories of some people taking months and months and months to go to the Preservation Board to get something approved. In most cases, these are people who forge ahead with a plan, who do not speak to staff, and go ahead, even if staff recommend they don't do it, they go ahead and they submit an application. The board gives them direction, they don't follow that direction, they have to go back. And we understand that people do want certain things for their homes, and we work with people as much as we possibly can to get that balance between protecting the character of the property and giving the homeowner or the property owner exactly what they want. So historic preservation incentives. I'm going to speak about some of these that we have at the moment, and then Jeremy, do you want to talk about the NCD rate coming up? One of the items we have at the moment is called the ad valorem tax exemption, and the simplest way to explain how that works is this is an exemption on property taxes attributed to improvements to the property. If you have a property that you buy for $100,000 or it's valued at $100,000, and that property needs a lot of work, you go in, you do the plumbing, you do the electrics, you do the windows, you do the roof, you put an addition on the back, and you do all that work, and then at the end of the work your property is worth $250,000. you will not pay that increase in taxes for 10 years. So you will actually save those taxes for 10 years. And the reason we do this is because we would rather people keep the historic building, make it habitable, make it livable, rather than tear it down and build something new. So there's that tax incentive. And the second item we have is zoning code relief. And the Historic Preservation Board can provide certain waivers, and staff can also recommend change zoning code relief. And probably the best example of that is if you have a historic home and you want to do an addition at the back, and you maybe find that your rear setback is 15 feet, but you want to do a larger addition, so your rear setback would only be 10 feet, then we can recommend approval of that so you can get the addition that you want. So there are certain zoning requirements that we can waive. There are also some building code reliefs. We were at property during the week. It was an apartment building, and the owner restored the building in the interior, and one of the staircases in the interior was much narrower than would be allowed by code today. But because they were restoring the historic building, because they were bringing it back into use, they were allowed to keep that narrow staircase. So that actually saved them in actually knocking down walls to actually build a wider staircase. So there are some, there are building code advantages with historic buildings. And as long as the building code relief doesn't lead to danger to life or makes the property unsafe, then in a lot of cases we can get certain requirements waived. The city is also working on creating a preservation fund at the moment, and this is moving along. And people have asked us about it in the past, and they've asked how much money is there. This is a relatively new thing. We will be getting funding for this preservation fund from the Arts and Public Places programme, and I think it's good place to bring Jeremy in and talk about the various other incentives that are being offered.
Are you going to the NCD too? Or are you still on historic?
No, we're only talking about historic preservation for the most part tonight, although I'm going to talk about the NCD as it relates to certain, I'd prefer not to be interrupted if we could finish and then hold the questions to the end, if you don't mind. No, but I want to, so we're not going to jump entirely to that. We've got additional slides after this, or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll come back to it.
Thank you.
If you don't mind. So there's a couple pending pieces of legislation that are moving through the process currently that have implications, particularly for this designation as well as designations in general. There is already existing a preservation fund in the city, and it's going to get funded through a portion of the Arts and Public Places programs. Funds go towards that. So any new public building that gets built, a percentage of that public building's construction costs gets put aside for Art and Public Places, and of that, 20% of it gets into a preservation fund. So as public buildings get built, that fund continues to grow. It's only been in existence for about a year and a half, so it's not well funded yet. There is also as probably many of you know, we're working on a zoning overlay for all of Coconut Grove as well. And through that zoning overlay, we're able to do certain things for West Grove, for the historic properties. And it hasn't passed yet, but the initiatives that we're doing that we want to make really good incentives for this designation are allowing flexibility in terms of what the building can be used for. So general commercial uses for a portion of the building, because that's what these buildings were historically. A lot of them had businesses in the front half of the building, while people lived in the back. So the other incentive that we want to do is to allow, certain buildings in the Grove and certain buildings throughout the city have like a granny flat where you have the main structure, and then you have a smaller structure behind. In this case, since these tend to be smaller structures, we're going to say you could actually build your main residence behind, and that any of these that are less than 1,200 square feet can serve as your accessory dwelling unit, and is the lingo term for a granny flat. Which is actually larger than is typically allowed for an accessory dwelling unit in the city. So that's another incentive that's in there. And We also have the transfer of development density, which should help fund the preservation fund, but that's a whole additional thing. So, but in any case, if that's another piece of legislation pending that would add funds to the existing preservation fund. So I'm going to turn it back over to Warren.
So hopefully you can see that we are aware that, that we need to make historic properties attractive for people to keep. And so we're working in ways to try and encourage people to do that. We want people to be able to stand back and say, you know, if I keep this historic building, you know, I can get my tax incentive, I can add on to the back of it, I can build another structure, I may even be able to run a business from here as well. And hey, guess what? There may be money available in the preservation fund. And one thing that wasn't mentioned about the preservation fund is it's specifically going to be targeted for the most needy people in the community. So the money from the preservation fund will be on a means-tested basis, and it will go to the people that actually need that funding. So we can now take any questions. Yes?
So as of now, in City of Miami, you can have 25% of your home as an office, correct? Commercial use.
Correct.
So what else we're getting if we, like, what's the...
So you're not allowed to hang a shingle, basically. You know, you can't have a sign, you can't have any sort of public facing. It has to be 100% sort of interior home office that's allowed. So this is going to say you can actually have some public interaction with the business. This is going to be by process of exception. You know, you still have to go through a pretty rigorous review to make sure it's not disruptive to the neighborhood. You know, it can't be something with a lot of turnover, a lot of parking requirements, for instance.
Second question, if I may. Most of these homes, you can't build a second-story addition if they're only one story, because I guess structure will not support it. If you want to add a granny flat, if I have 5,000 square feet and I have, let's say, 1,400 square feet on one floor, that's about, let's say, 30 by 55. How can you add another 1,200 square feet without encroaching the setbacks?
Well, you can encroach in the setbacks, which is what the zoning lets you play with a little bit. And you can, on the addition, it can be second story, it can be 2 stories.
You could do an addition on the back.
Yeah, you couldn't necessarily build on top of the existing structure, but you could build.
So if I have 20-foot setback in the back, how, more or less, how much you let me encroach? 10 feet, 12 feet into it?
I mean, it depends
I mean,
on the,
just like-
it does, depends on the project, but yeah, probably 10
Almost.
feet. It could probably be 10 feet. Yes.
I want to address my question to Warren. When you mentioned the ad valorem tax, you made it sound like it's an automatic, but from what I've read, it's not. It's a process where you have to make the application and go in front of the HEP board and fill out the paperwork, and for them to approve that you get the ad valorem exemption on your improvements, and it's only for a maximum of 10 years. So I think that it's not fair if you make somebody think forever they're going to have this tax exemption, because they're not, unless I've totally misread
I
it.
believe I said 10 years.
Unless,
I said 10 years.
but you
And
didn't
on top of
explain that there's a process that you
the-
have to go through to get it. It's not
Yeah,
automatic.
there is a process, because you will only get the tax exemption if the alterations are appropriate for the property. So the Historic Preservation Board has to review.
That's all I'm asking you to say. There's more to it than...
Yeah, and so again, if you work with us and the alterations to the property are appropriate, we'll walk you through that process. And then, yes, you are correct, the board, there is an application process. We will walk you through it. As far as I'm aware, if we take you through the process, then the board's generally supportive of our recommendations. So it is a process, yes.
Where's the parking going for these ADUs?
There's no parking required on site, so it would be on-street parking if required, or, you know, in the case, they're not always necessarily rented. It could be in the family as well, so it might be the same family.
So you don't think that's going to be a parking issue for the West Grove?
I don't
like it
think
is
it's
for the
going to be an
rest of the Grove?
overwhelming issue. I don't think the majority of these, you know, it's not going to be every single one that has one. So I
So
don't think
Granny
it'll be
doesn't have a
serious.
car? There's lots of grannies drive.
Some might. I don't think it'll be a significant issue.
So why was Miami Parking Authority giving out tickets last Sunday morning at 9 a.m.?
You'd have to ask Miami Parking
Yeah,
Authority.
well,
I'm not
because
sure.
there's not
Was it on
parking in the West
Grant?
Grove, and they were specifically giving tickets in the West Grove Sunday morning.
And the residential streets?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were.
Yeah.
I mean, for people who were not,
Curious about that.
and we already are squeezed in over here, and by adding these ADUs, you're not giving the people really proper information that they need, and they're gonna start getting code
I'm sorry,
violations.
what
It's
did
not
we
fair.
misspeak
It's
about?
not fair, you're not
If
being
you'd be specific about
transparent.
which part we misspoke about, I'll address it.
Well, last Sunday morning at 9 a.m., Miami Parking Authority was out giving tickets, JB saw it, I have it on video,
On the
And you saw
residential
it.
streets,
on Charles.
Yeah, Charles, the
Yeah.
problem is there's only a 40-foot street, and we need to have.
And it was a house that only had 2 vehicles, so it's not like they were having a bunch of, and a car wasn't on the street. It was a little bit on the sidewalk, but we already
was a car on
have a
the
parking
sidewalk.
issue. But no, but we already have a parking issue. No, but it's still, you're talking about a house that had only 2 cars, and you're going to allow that house to add a granny flat. And if they can't already park 2 cars and they're being ticketed, how are they going to add a granny flat and maybe have a 3rd car? It's just,
look, I acknowledge that Charles is an issue because it's the only street that has a narrow right-of-way like that. I do think that's a particular issue on Charles, but I think that's an issue on Charles no matter what. And we need to look at, sort of work with Public Works about figuring out how
because
to make that work better.
Margaret, those people have to have parking stickers because of the market on Grand for the weekends and stuff. It's just, these things need to be thought about. These are issues.
We examined it. I don't think, considering how much they're scattered, that it's a significant problem. Is it a problem on certain properties? Maybe. I don't think it's a significant problem roadwide. Sure.
I'm in the middle of restoring one of mine. I have spent a small fortune doing it. How much can I deduct from my taxes? Or how much of a tax break am I going to get if I get declared historic?
Once it's just historic, it's the difference in the cost of improvements.
But in
But
general,
it'll be
these
retroactive?
aren't retroactive though. So
You add it.
the people that really do well out of that are the ones that take the dilapidated properties and actually bring them up to habitable status. So it doesn't work for everyone.
Okay, another question is, if I were to accept any kind of money from this fund that you guys are going to have from Art and Public Places, et cetera, and supposing I were to qualify and I were to write my own grant, et cetera, what do I have to sign away? Any rights to my property? Do I have to sign anything away? Or is it just going to be, you give me the money, I fix it, it goes into it, and that's it? You're not going to ask me not to sell for certain amounts, or is there something that you guys get from me in return?
Well, we get the historic property retained and brought back up to code. We're still working the application process. There may be some form of covenant just to say that you'll maintain the property in good condition for so many years. But, you know, we're not anticipating the city with any.
Is that grant taxable? We have to pay tax on that, income tax? Or?
That I'm not sure.
There was had a special, a series, I think it was 2015, called Rotting Houses for the McFarland Homestead District, where a lot of the houses that were required to be preserved started falling apart. And a lot of the siding, for example, started rotting away, and people started getting cited for not having or not maintaining the houses the way they should. But Coral Gables had actually fixed the houses for them, and it was the work of Coral Gables that was falling apart. And they had used non-galvanized nails, for example. They used wood that I guess was subpar, but the houses started falling apart. And actually, as you drive around the McFarland Homestead District, you can see a lot of the damage to the houses. It's still present, and you know, I'm wondering if you know what are the chances that we're going to get fined if the same thing happens to our houses and we don't move quickly enough to fix it?
Well, in most cases, you should be maintaining your property anyway. And, you know, you can't let your property fall into disrepair whether it's historic or not. But what we would say about these particular houses is that these houses were relatively cheaply built using cheap materials. So to maintain these houses, there's no reason that your maintenance costs should suddenly increase beyond what they are now. You can replace dilapidated wood siding with an appropriate wood siding. You can remove your wood frame windows, which can be expensive to repair, and replace them with some of the cheapest on the market, and aluminum impact single hung windows. And if you have to do your roof, then, as I said, the majority of these homes have had asphalt shingles on them, which is probably the cheapest roofing material. So, by designating these properties, there's no reason that the way they are being maintained should differ from the way they're being maintained at the moment. Costs won't go up, materials won't change. You know, we would want to see most of these houses livable, workable, and safe from hurricanes.
Well, the reason why a lot of these houses are still standing is because they were built with Dade County time. And they were built to a somewhat of a better standard, I suppose, than a lot of what we do now. Because our requirements right now, like such as moisture barriers and things like that, were not used then. And those kind of things tend to rot wood. Also, you know, tree canopy is the biggest enemy of a wooden house. So I would expect that a lot of these houses are not going to have any trees next to them. Or at least I don't want to have any near mine.
Yeah, but as we said as well, you know, there may be some building code requirements that may be able to be waived because you are maintaining the historic home. But we would caution you that in some cases, some things that may be waived, you don't want the house to necessarily be unsafe in a hurricane. So it's all about getting that balance between maintaining the character of the house, making it livable, making it safe, and making sure that by carrying out ongoing repairs, the property actually stays in good condition. Don't forget, a lot of these houses are 100 years, you know, almost 100 years old. Or, you know, certainly 70, 80, 90, and they're still here, they're still standing through the hurricanes and through the...
But that doesn't mean they
So
were
is my
not
dad.
rebuilt. I mean, some were rebuilt. They got fired, they rebuilt. It's not the
Possibly,
same
and
wood from
that would be
100
exactly the same whether it's a historic building or not.
But I mean, you're making it sound like they built it 100 years ago. It's still the same wood every corner of the house. It's not the case.
And a lot, if you maintain the wood, it can easily last. It can easily last for that.
But it's
That's
also
fine.
okay, and it doesn't violate the historic nature of them if
No, no,
if
what I'm saying
portions
is
have
that
been
the
rebuilt.
argument is it's been here for 100 years or been here for 100 years is not really accurate, because it's not the case. I mean, maybe some trusses are 100 years old, but a lot of siding has been replaced.
But that's actually fine,
Yeah,
because they're sort of organic structures, people move in and out, so, but that doesn't necessarily, if it was rebuilt, and it's more or less in character with what was there before,
Well,
it
what I'm
still
saying is
maintains its
if I
historic
want to put
integrity.
hardy board, I can't put hardy board, right? I can't put the composite siding, I have to go with the wood siding, no? Can I do the composite siding?
You may be able to do the composite on the rear, but on the areas that are visible from the public right-of-way, then we would want wood. But you can go to the board and request it, although staff's recommendation would probably be with wood of a similar profile. Can we ask
I just want to ask you, do I have to replace my siding? When I do replace my siding, do I have to go and apply for a permit and go through the whole process? Because right now, it's every 3 years that I have to replace pieces of
What you would have to do is go through your regular permit process, but if you're repairing the siding and using the same siding that's there, then staff can probably approve that for you.
So I do need to get approval, I do need to get permitting to replace a piece of board.
As you would per a typical building permit
Whether you're historic.
with historic.
Well, he
So
just said
yeah,
a piece of board, which
Sorry, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, if there's any other...
No, can we, one meeting, please, so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want to thank the West Grove community, which you may not be aware of. The last meeting last week, they voted unanimously that the West Grove property owners that we put on a preservation list should have the right to opt in and opt out. Are you aware of that?
Was this at HODA, or
The last meeting. Are you aware of that?
I was not aware of that?
Okay. I'm also requesting that we grandfather in that the owner of the property should also be grandfathered in for the size of the amount of square footage that they're allowed to build when they bought the property. And I would like this community to think about it, because what they're telling you, I have a building, and I have pictures of it, and it's a report from a company, that the building I bought, which was bought to be torn down and sold to a builder, and I have a builder who wants to buy it. We applied for a demolition permit around the 20th something of February, before all this came out. The city of Miami said it has to be demolished. But they won't give us a permit because you're stopping them from giving you a permit because of what you're doing. Now, this is America. I didn't buy that house to make it a preservation. It's gonna cost $230,000 to repair it. That's not including the attic, because there was no crawl space, they couldn't get it into the attic. Now, why would I, who bought a lot, sell it to a builder, you're not letting demolish stuff, the building, why would I want to spend $230,000 and then maintain it according to your rules and restrictions? That's un-American, that's taking my property rights away from me. And there's a law, if you want it, buy it. If you want it not to be used by a builder, you buy it. But you don't tell me I can't do anything with it but pay taxes. My tax bill was almost $5,800 for last year. Now, this doesn't seem like America to me. We have rights. We have the right to want to do what you want to do, but we have the right to say yes or no, and not be punished because we're not going to go along with it. And that's what it sounds like. They don't even know what the restrictions are going to be. I don't care where they are. I would like you to look at the pictures and see the condition. The foundation of things that prop it up are old, crawling old. If you walk in the building, it smells of urine. All the pipes are corroded. It's got mold. It's got termites. It's got rocks everywhere. On the outside, it looks nice. I'm willing to donate it to you. You can move it onto a lot and let it sit there. But I don't want to. It's really important. As it's dark. There's not anybody here who thinks they should have the right to tell me that I can't do this and I can't do that, and they're not going to buy it from me. They're just going to say, you are stuck. Who thinks that's a good idea? Anybody?
No.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. My husband was in World War II. He fought for the American rights. That's the right to own property and not be told what you should or shouldn't do with it. They even went out and said it should be demolished. They put a sign on the wall. Somebody tore it down. Now they say, because of what's going on. By the way, this hasn't been passed yet, but I'm being controlled by it. And I think it's un-American. And there's a rule that if you want to take my property, you have to pay me for it. Today's market value, by the way, for the land is $350,000.
I'd like to hear. See, there is no community in the United States like Oklahoma. It's one of a kind. So whatever assessments you use to determine whether or not it be deemed historical, it needs to be revamped for this community. Now, we know that many developers, not pointing at you, young lady, we know that there are a lot of developers that are purchasing these homes to tear them down, get the zoning changed, put 2 sugar cubes on that lot. We know that is happening. So what I'm suggesting you consider and maybe implement is the fact that the homeowners in this community who have homesteaded their homes be permitted to opt in with the assurance that there will be some financing to help assist them in maintaining the exterior of their home. And all the rest of them, make them designated historical. But if their home is homestead for 10 years or more, that means they're not living in these homes to have them torn down and build 2 sugar cubes on one lot. They should have the option to opt into that program, and with the assurance that you will assist them as necessary to upkeep the exterior of their home. And I'd like to say something else. I don't know when you might jump into the NCD2, but I want to say
This isn't an NCD.
okay, well, this is an
We
NCD.
prefer to keep it.
Okay, well,
If you can have an aside, that would be great.
all right, then good, because this
We want to
is
keep this focused on historic preservation.
this is a historical community with historical homes in the historical community. And when you allow developers to come in, like we allowed, the last commission we had allowed developers to come in to tear down 2 historical homes, one on Fro, one on I think it's Oak, and then the 2 lots on Douglas Road, and designate that property industrial, when you cannot put an industrial development abutting a residential community. That's the trolley. The trolley, and it was they tried to pass it off as commercial. Now, the commissioner was in league with them because he allowed planning and zoning to push it on through when they shouldn't have done. And I am in fear, this community is in fear that the 2 lots abutting the Playhouse that were purchased for $1 million each, and with the assessed value of less than $500,000 for the both, that there is going to be some commercial development more on Charles Avenue as the restaurant next to the Stirrups House. Commercial development on the historical street, historical community should not be. And I don't believe that our commissioner is in league with developers to put a massive development, I don't believe, am I right? To put a massive development on those 2 lots abutting the Playhouse. There are 8 vacant lots east of the main highway. And we don't want commercial development in our residential historical community. You know, so if that has anything to do with your historical designation, make certain that the community is designated historical. We're the first community in South Florida, in Miami, and then Overtown developed because a lot of people, a few people benefited from the 40 acres and a mule. They had to come here to earn money to buy seed to farm their land in the Carolinas and Georgia. And so when the railroad came in, that's when Overtown started being built up with African Americans. But this community is the first in the city of Miami. So preserve the entire community as well as the building and the people in this community. That's what I have to say.
Sorry. First, one, two. No, 1, 2.
I feel at a deja vu. I'm from Miami Beach. We sat in groups of people, just like all of you, and the first meeting, everybody said the same thing. We don't want it because I can't sell my property, I can't do this. I just wanted to suggest, you mentioned it, but you didn't describe it, the TDRs. I think that that's something important for the people who own properties to know. The TDRs are magical. They work for the MIMO district up on Biscayne Boulevard. I'd rather you explain it to me. What other suggestion I had, we have the same old problem with parking, we still have it. And the beach, because of historic preservation, the economy went up. The beach was almost bankrupt the days that we first sat talking about saving South Beach. It was in deplorable condition. Nobody cared about it. And now it has reached beyond success. But the parking issue always comes up, and we have a parking program where the parking department gives decals to your homeowners, residents, and that allows you to have your parking space. And your guests would have to have special decal to be able to park. So there are ways to solve the things that we're worried about. You just don't be afraid of it.
What is your name?
Nancy Liebman.
Pardon?
Nancy Liebman.
Oh, Nancy, from Preservation on Miami Beach. You should have introduced yourself so we all know who you were. I guess you're not aware there's no TDRs.
Well, let me answer, please.
No,
So we have one
yeah,
meeting.
she's opening the horn.
Yeah, I'm
Jump in.
about to answer if you
Thank you.
allow me.
Now, the TDRs are for...
So I have to, let me answer that specifically. So
I think
for the single family home districts, they don't have TDRs available for sale because there's no air rights over single family or duplex lots. They're only available when the historic structure is smaller than what zoning allows. So in this case, in most cases, some of these might be along commercial streets where they might be able to take advantage. But this is where there's a proposed language or proposed legislation that's about transfer of development density. Some of these properties, if they're say a single family home and a duplex lot, they can sell the density. And also that program will be channeling a portion of its funds to the Historic Preservation Fund. So
Preservation fund is a fantastic idea. We're doing that ourselves.
yeah, I think it's critical, and it's part of the reason it's there is because single-family homes or in single-family zoning cannot take advantage of the TDRs. So, do you have a question? Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, 1, 2. Well, I forgot how to count.
My name is Marvin Dunn. I'm a historian. I've written about Black Mountain for 4 years. I've owned 2 homes in Coconut Grove. I want to make one correction. The Black community of Coconut Grove is not the first Black community in Miami. That was in Lemon City before Coconut Grove. There were 3 Black communities in Lemon City before Coconut Grove was established. And they're gone. Disappeared. It's now Little Haiti. I believe in preservation. I also recognize that development is unavoidable. It's inevitable. I'm not opposed to development. But just for a moment, I want to speak for the people who will be born 100 years from now. When they want to come through and see what was here that represents the physical history of this community. And of course, the individual property issues, I can't speak to those. I recognize those as reality. But I plead with you, whatever the outcome, as you resolve these individual issues and property demands of homeowners, which is certainly fair, that you leave at least some of these historic homes available for the next generation. The folks who are not here today to speak, to say we want to take 100 years from now to come to Coconut Grove and see some physical manifestation of our history. And this is not happening around this country. These historic communities, especially Black historic communities, are disappearing. So I just plead for you, speaking for people not get born, this is important.
I met these individuals from Miami Beach, and everybody is a fair right in a free country to have their opinion. At that moment, I am having deja vu because we were trying to sell my 95-year-old father's in-laws property. Because the mayor came in and put a 4-month moratorium, we almost couldn't close on a house he sold, and before he died, he wanted to know, after paying taxes in that house for 50 years that he built, that he could sell his house. Because the mayor was there and my husband told the story, we were exempt. But also because our buyer knew we were only exempt on that contract. 1 year later, all those people were voted out at the commission, and our property that we had to be forced to sell at a discount because of this going on went up 50%. It cost my family. So sometimes things sound good on the surface, but I'm a real estate major. I studied from all the best people at University of Florida. My major was business, my major was real estate. Taking away people's property rights, whatever you call it, whatever veil you put it under, is taking away their rights and their values. And there's a market price that people will pay for a home. I lived on Crystal View Court when I was first married, and I was a neighbor, Marvin Dunn. This neighborhood is a really incredible neighborhood, but my sister's out of town, and she has a property on here, and I don't know if she gave me permission to speak for her on her behalf. But the idea of opting in and opting out is the best of both worlds. We're in a community, we all love it, we all care about it, we all have our perspective and our bias. But doing things for the right reason, and there are people who do want to preserve it, and they should be given benefits for doing so, because it is expensive to maintain a home that's not meant to live forever. It costs money to maintain for another 100 years for the next generation, and that's just the way it is. Whatever the material, whatever it is, it costs money. You know, labor's more expensive, materials go up, and some things get eaten by termites. But in Florida, particularly wood. So, and mold, and I've had that in my home. So my bottom line is that I hope as you all continue, and I'm very happy that this is a civil conversation, but I do believe in the rights of freedom of choice, because when you impact somebody's survival and their nest egg, and everybody has different motivations, but unless someone's willing to pay for my problem, I shouldn't be forced to do it for someone else because they think it's a good idea. Not in a free country like America, and not in the incredible neighborhood we live in, with the incredible officials we have. Everybody here is doing things because it's in their heart, and I appreciate that. But I think we have to step back when we start demanding and imposing things on other people, that you are imposing on what they can do in their life for their family members, for their generations to come, that they want to leave a nest egg for a niece or nephew that maybe is having trouble buying a home. Everybody, it's a free country, that's why we invest in it. So I think that perhaps having a street where you move some of these incredible buildings, and maybe we create one of our city parks and we allow it to change, that on the side of it, there are these magnificent homes that people travel in buses to come see, and that we can experience what that was and appreciate that history. But I think when you make people keep it on their land, and if they could build 4,000 now with their 900 square foot house and you put another 600 on, they're still being gypped. They're still being not given the free right to do what they should fully do. So I hope as a community, and all of you with this passion in your heart, we can continue to have conversations that bring a sensible issue that isn't predetermined before we meet. Let's be open to having conversations that everybody can have a little piece of what they need and is fair. And if someone bought their property, as my mom and my sister, prior to this all happening behind the scenes, I think there should be certain people grandfathered in. So I believe strongly in the opt-in, opt-out. I believe the people who opt in should be given incentive and money to help them afford to maintain their beautiful homes, to show and share with the world. And I think that in a free country that can be done. Maybe organizations, preservation organizations can raise money to do that, to help these people who are very happy to live in that home and very happy to share the history. I think it's a win-win when we give each person who has their passion. He has a passion, he wants it, to get the money. So
So that my words are not misconstrued, I did not mention opt-out. What I mentioned was that if this has been your home for generations, you've been living in this home for 10 years, it's homesteaded. You should have the option to opt in with the assurance of assistance to maintain the exterior.
Absolutely, and my only point is that that's your perspective, so that I agree. So I think it helps everybody when that it might opt in and opt out.
Go ahead.
My name is Dolly McIntyre, and I've been a preservationist for a long time. You know, the object of this exercise is to try to preserve West Grove. Its structures, its people, its culture, and its trees. That's what this is all about. Nobody's trying to punish anybody or deprive anybody of anything. We're trying to see if there isn't a way to save all the good things that exist in West Grove. Now, I live in a 2-story single-family home, but I would really like to put up a 4-story apartment building. But you know what? I can't do it. The zoning code tells me what I can do with my property. So all of us already have that problem, whether it's historic or not.
I think that's a bad example, though. Let's
please, one at a time.
Let it go. Why is it a bad example? The zoning code tells me what I can do with my property. So it's not different than being historically designated and given certain guidelines. But anyway, the goal here is to try to preserve your heritage and your culture and your people.
I moved 20 years ago to the Grove, and my first part was the North Grove. And I love walking in Aviation Street, or I can't remember right now the streets, but there were small bungalows. They were really pretty. I always felt that each of them had a personality, and they're all gone. Now we have these townhouses, which I lived in one of those myself. They look one after the other the same, and some of them have nothing to do with Coconut Grove or the sense of architecture that you might feel. And I understand that, like if I died, I want my children to inherit something. But it's not just the financial gain, I want them to remember where they grew up. I want my grandchildren to see where their mother grew up. I want them to share that experience of a laid-back Coconut Grove. I know that everybody would like to be able to sell to someone to build something else, but I hope whoever is buying, they keep in mind what Coconut Grove is and was, and it looks like. That's all, I mean, we all, I'm sure it'll just make it better.
I complexes for 17 years. I've been fixing them, I've been trying to keep them going and fought demolition from the city for the last 5. About 10 years ago, one group of advisors, they were demolishing houses, the wooden houses. I said, if you have one that's in pretty good shape, I'd love to have it. They gave me a wooden house. I had nowhere to put it. I would have moved it to put it somewhere else. But that would have been by my choice, not because I had to. Sir, Mr. Dunn, I think you're a great man here, a great part of the community. And I can tell you that, wouldn't it be nicer to have one street where you could see all this architecture put together, rather than have it peppered in between those block houses, those ice cubes, as everybody calls them? Set up Charles and or somewhere. Buy the houses, or take them as a donation from developers before they knock them down and move them.
Where you from?
No, sorry.
And was
One
done?
time, one at a time, please.
They ask no questions, guys.
Would you like Mr. Dunn to answer directly?
Yes, please. If you would like to.
Actually, I thought about that as well, but I think the problem with that is you lose a lot when you move these structures from where they stood originally. Now we have a kind of a Disneyland configuration, which really isn't historic at all. It may be a last resort if they come to that, but I really don't think that that's the way to preserve community.
May I have one? The thing is that a lot of these houses may be contributing to 2 or 3 that have history, that have official history, that had somebody who was special who lived in them. The others may not. They may just be contributing structures that were built for rentals, that were built for whatever other purpose. So the fact that they sit where they sit is just a coin toss. If everything around them has been removed, there's no value to it. What it does is it gives you a little wooden house between ice cubes. And basically the fact that you cannot fulfill the value of the land is worth a lot more than the house. So for a lot of us, it's our piggy bank. Like I'm sure it is for a lot of you. So the idea of taking a house and making it historic, which is a wooden house, it's not Miami Beach, and I've been here since the early 80s, and I worked on the Paradise Lost issue of Time Magazine. My father is a Second World War vet. He was a Time Magazine bureau chief here in Miami when we did that issue. And it was very important. I walked all of South Beach when it was derelict and it was full of Marielitos, and it was revived by the people, by people who cared and came one at a time and started reviving them. Then the city got involved. I was there. I know.
Let's.
My comment.
Sorry, I want to let people that haven't spoken before speak. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold me to that.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Serraldo. I'm the director of the Miami Design Preservation League. We are based in Miami Beach on Ocean Drive, but we do a lot throughout South Florida. And although in Miami Beach we have 14 local historic districts, a few years ago we got involved in Little Havana because the neighbors in Little Havana came to us and said, we do not have a Latin American historic district. And we think this is an important community that we want to recognize through having a historic district. And it is true what the gentleman said. We probably don't have George Washington who lived in the little shop-in houses. We have people whose names we'll never know. But they built the hotels that helped propel the economy and the high-rises that we see downtown. And then they came back at nighttime. And yeah, we might not even know where they're buried when they were born, when they died. But that's not really the point of this historic district. The point is that this is an important, the African American story is so important to South Florida. And for us just to say, because the current owners, and I understand the McMansion issues that we fought in Miami Beach, and some people weren't happy about that. We had a lot of tear downs of beautiful old homes, and the current owners said, no, we just want top dollar. And the other people in the neighborhood said, what about the future of our community? So it is up to you all in the community to decide whether you think this heritage is worth saving. I'll tell you from my perspective, it absolutely is, and I hope you do.
What happened to the Little Havana? What happened to the Little
No, sorry,
Havana?
one meeting.
We had a historic
sorry.
district created.
Okay.
One meeting.
Just a little.
Yeah,
But we need
I have a question about the preservation fund. How much is being allocated for the fund? What's the process? Is it first come, first served? And how much will be funded to each house? And then do you have to go in front of the board to receive funding? And what's that protocol?
So we're still working on the application process because frankly the fund, as I mentioned, it's not a large number yet. As our public places projects come in, it'll get more funding. So currently the plan is to work with Dade Heritage Trust as for part of the administration and have it be a need-based program. Beyond that, we don't have details for it yet, honestly. Sorry.
I'd just like to say,
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I want to go in order. I was next.
Hi, my name is Courtney Berry and I work at Berry University, and I'm very happy that Dr. Dunn came tonight. In previous meetings, I've spoken a lot about the impact that his work has on our students, and since it's come up so many times, I want to be even more specific tonight. So I work with a lot of young men of color, and the image that they see of themselves in the media is often a terrible one. And the role models that exist, while we have plenty of wonderful African-American men in our community that are role models, those aren't what we see publicly. It's not portrayed in history books, and it's certainly not portrayed in popular culture. And what I find is when we take students from Berry University, and I used to take them from high schools as well, on Dr. Dunn's tours, I have young men that are moved to tears, and they say things to me afterwards like, I want to go to college now. I didn't know that people from my community helped to build this community. They didn't see that identity in themselves. And it didn't happen once, it happens all the time. We're asking Dr. Dunn to come back in August and do a tour for our student leaders because it's one of the most impactful things that they report that they get out of their college experience. I have 2 students that just graduated in the spring that just got big-time nonprofit jobs in Washington, D.C. And they started their social service work after going on Dr. Dunn's tour. So it's not something that's intangible, it's something that's very real for me, something that I really experienced. And while I can appreciate people talking about, their individual property and being in this country, I don't like the hyperbola that's being said about people are making people do things. This is part of a community process. There will be a vote. No one's making anyone do anything. This is very much part of our democracy. Our democracy was founded on.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
And I think that if we can let the hyperbola go down a little bit and stop stoking fear, and really think about what this means in terms of our civic health and our identity as a community, what it means in terms of honoring the tradition of a community that was so mistreated in the past, I think is infinitely more valuable than any of our wallets. And I live right now in a house that is 1 bedroom, and we restored it to standards that I'm sure would be well beyond what's being asked by the Historic Preservation Board. It was not more expensive. We think our house is more desirable. And I was down in Key West last weekend, and I know that there are a lot of people that are profiting economically because of the historic preservation there, and many communities across the United States.
Sorry.
Parking issues on Charles?
Yes.
Parking issues on Charles?
I'm the person that got the parking
Sorry.
that everyone's talking about.
One meeting.
And it was because we were laying mulch, and so my car was out in the street. And we have plenty of room for a 3rd car if we want.
Okay.
I don't know. I moved to Coconut Grove in 1974 because it was unique. And yes, there have been, every 10 years there's changes. I know that. I've seen it happen. But it's still unique. And people want to come here and visit here because it's unique. And
Miami Beach, which, Nancy, I know you, was in decay. We are not in decay. We are not in decay. Our property is going up, 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 up. Not for the structure maybe, but for the land. And so we can't claim that. We can't claim that, you know, the decay. We have to realize these people want to come in, take our property, and build big buildings. And I live in a little 1938 house that I restored. My husband and I restored it. And people come in my house and they're like, wow, this is so cool. It's a bungalow. So if we tear down all these bungalows and build gated communities, you might as well live in Pembroke Pines, Miramar, or Kendall. That's not what we want. We want to have little houses, and everybody has their own unique house, and little neighborhoods. And this is what we're trying to do. I know it's hard. I tried to designate my neighborhood, and you know, the pushback was horrible. And now we're getting white boxes. So, you know, it will devalue your that will devalue your property. Eventually, as the West Grove is getting all these white cubes, this will devalue your property. They all look alike, and the developer's making the money, and the neighborhood will be gone.
That means I'm incredibly patient.
Daniel, thank you, Daniel, for bringing up Little Havana. Okay, because Mr. Russell, nobody was more passionate about this community than me on the campaign trail. You know that. I've been fighting every day, all day. And we've been tearing it down and tearing it down and tearing it down. And I agree to some extent about moving some of the houses. I understand why some people don't want to restore their houses. What bothers me the most is the lack of transparency. I want people to understand what I understand, that they are always going to have a wooden house. If Hurricane Susie comes tomorrow and knocks down their wooden house and they don't have insurance, they have to understand that if they don't have money to build the house back, they're only going to be able to sell that land, if that's what they choose to do, to someone who only wants a house that looks just like that house. And that is hard to find, especially on lots that are 34, 50 square feet. We just need to be honest and open and tell the people the truth. There is no endless supply of money. When Mr. Russell is gone, and Warren Adams is gone, and Jeremy's gone, nobody's staying in these jobs forever. Who are the people going to run to for help? Everyone doesn't understand the full gravity of what they're getting themselves into. If they want to keep their houses, keep them. If you want to move them somewhere and put plaques of their family on them and give them money so they can build a CBS house where they can get citizens insurance like I have, that's great too. We are under attack by the storm surges and sea level rise. I didn't want to buy into it. Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
This is one of the highest points in the city.
Yes, we are. I didn't want to buy into it. I didn't want to leave it. Listen, Jeremy, please. We put the cart before the horse. And Dr. Dunn, thank you for coming. Thank you, because you came to the Housing Summit when I asked you to. We do need to preserve this community. I'm sick over what's happened here. My mother is screaming at me every day from heaven. But we don't have a pot of gold here to give to people, and people need to know what they're getting into. I just want everyone to know what their position and what their situation is before it goes any further, and that's not been the case. And everybody hasn't been very nice about it. I don't have a house over here, but we have a serious problem. And to go back to the reason why this man's here, because I nagged him worse than I nagged my father, and he's my brother's age. Because I harped on him about why Little Havana before us. Because I stood up at City Hall when I saw Castro's name 9 days on the agenda after he died and Trump wasn't sworn in. And I looked at Frank Carollo and I said, 9 days? Where's our paragraph? 1890s behind me and 1960s on the dais. What in hell, what's going on? So thank you for bringing that up and giving me the opportunity to say it.
Sorry. No, she's next. Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry.
I just want to ask a question to everybody that's in this room, because I'm born and raised Coconut Grove. And we talking about West Grove, which is Black Grove community, since it's West Grove now. How many people born and raised in this room from West Grove? Can you raise your hand, please? Because there's a lot of people that's speaking on what should and should not be done to West Grove. I feel like a lot of houses should be, if it's going to be preserved, we have concrete structures that's 80 years old as well. They get on the ballot, they get on the City Hall, and it's passed. They're able to knock them down and build up. Tell me why is it just the wooden structures?
Good point.
I'm living in a house, in a duplex right now that's 80 years old.
Good point.
If you're talking about preserving the community, we are the people of the community.
This was just the first one that we have attempted, but we are more than willing to work with the community if they believe that there are other types of structures, other areas that they feel should be protected. And it has been said, this is more about than just protecting the buildings. This is about protecting the community, it's about protecting the culture, it's about protecting the feeling, it's about protecting the property rights of the people who have actually lived and grown up here. And this, in some ways is actually a small step against, in some cases, gentrification. Because we're hoping that by keeping these houses, they remain affordable for the people in the community to continue living there and to attract other family members to this community. So we're absolutely more than happy to work with the community and look at other ways that we can help preserve what the community feels is important and should be preserved.
And when you say, just go back on that, because he was answering something I talked about. When you say affordable, let's make it affordable for the people of West Grove, because that's who's being affected. That's who we talking about, the people that want to live in West Grove. I don't want to move. I'm born and raised here, raising 2 children here. I want to be here, but it's not affordable to be here.
No.
I walk in these same streets that I'm here right now. Right now, everybody talking about the wooden structures. Yes, I love them too. I'm born and raised here. I know Miss Gator House. I know her family. I love to see that. I love to see that. Don't get me wrong. But in Coconut Grove, it's more than that. I walk down the street and cry sometimes.
Well, I would be happy for you to take my card and give me a call this week, and we'll speak to you and we'll find out exactly what the long-term members of the community want to see. And we're more than happy.
That's exactly what we want.
Those are late in the day.
Hello, everybody. Hello. My name is Benny Chapman. I'm a little puzzled sitting here. I see somebody say this, say that, about the developers coming in, about we can't sell our homes, we can't do what we want with our homes, because the government says that if you do this, you got to pay a fine. But let me tell you something. If you let the developers come in here and build what they want, and they don't get charged, why can't we all get together and go to the government, go to City Hall, and let's put a rule down. We don't want them coming in here changing our community. Now we could do that. They're coming in here together, putting up these old tall buildings with no windows. They could be having drugs growing in there. We don't know. But if they could come in here and put a structure up like that in our community when we were people living as a family, and they don't say anything. We need to say something about them putting those little tall buildings in our neighborhoods among our historic buildings. Now y'all listen, you better do it. You hear me? Okay.
One, two. Yeah.
I just want to remind you that I am willing to donate buildings to you. if you see the building, I showed you the picture. It's rotten. Everything is rotten. Nobody would want this place unless you spend $230,000. So it's not fair to make me do it. You know, my grandson lives in they have a park. No, in the park they have all that. And they celebrate your life as it was again. You could do that. Get some lots in a row. And I'll just say, you don't need 62 back. You don't need one. I need to sell my house. And if someone else wants to buy it, leave it alone, I don't care. The value is set based on they're not going to build a high-rise on it. I think there's a rule, there's a law that says you have to process. This is a condemnation. In fact, there's a transparency.
Okay, and this is to the young man who suggests that we move all the houses in one area. Let me tell you what's bad about this. If you take a trip on Matilda, north of the tennis court, you look on the west side and you'll see the home where Pierre Sands used to live. It looks like it's out of place, but every building around it is out of place. So when you see that home there, it's not on the historical list, but when you see that home there, it gives you a sense of what the neighborhood used to look like. What's been destroyed in our neighborhood. So take a trip over there and you'll see why it shouldn't happen, to your suggestions.
All right, may I respond?
Yeah.
I understand perfectly well, and I accept what you're saying with great respect, you know. But the problem is that you're not going to be able to stop. First of all, thematic designation is not something that goes to a ballot. Warren, how often has this been done in this town?
Thematic?
The thematic designation, historical designation.
This is the first thematic.
This is the first time it's being done. Normally, when you do a historic district, it goes to the ballot, correct?
No, they don't. And the district, no ballot.
No, it follows the same process otherwise. And then, sorry, did you have? Yeah.
The last meeting that we had across the street before, I think it was Tuesday, right? The new buildings that are going up, there's supposed to be something, a design put in place that those buildings weren't supposed to be like that.
That's correct.
Okay?
In
But
certain
somebody,
parts.
yeah, but what they did was, they applied for this waiver. Instead of posting it like they used to do on the telegram poles or posting around, go to City Hall and see if you're going to allow these people to put these buildings in. But what they did was, they applied for a waiver, and by the time they got to us, the 15 days was over. So what I would like to have done, that we could put in place, that whatever's there, we can't tear it down, it's there. But if anybody wants to build, there has to be a certain design. That design that was put in place, probably in the 70s, needs to come off the shelf. It needs to come off the shelf so that we could look like Coconut Grove. For me and my property, George Alexander Gibson might not be somebody to you all, but he's my father. My grandparents came from the Bahamas. Timothy Gibson, Loretta Estelle Gibson, they are somebody to me. And without them, I wouldn't be here. I am somebody. And I want my property to be designated historical in Coconut Grove on Fro Avenue.
That's how Coconut Grove is annexed to the city of Miami.
Yeah, because this meeting was announced with this subject matter like quite early.
Not quite early.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think it's been, but it's been dates. It's been certain for that date since.
And I only got notified by one thing.
Since April.
I only got notified for one meeting by certified mail. No other meeting. I found out about these other meetings through someone I know, not by notice.
Are you on the list? Get on the list.
I'm on the
No,
list,
but
but they don't notice.
I would like to talk to you about that afterwards too, though.
I'm on the list that they're taking my property rights, so they know who I am.
Sorry, go ahead.
My name is Al Crespo. I'm a blogger. I published a story today about zoning and TDRs and TDDs. I don't live in the Grove. When I was a kid, I drove through here. When I was younger, I came through here. 10 years ago, it's different than what it is today. Now, it's my understanding that, and I wrote about this as part of my story that's up today, that in July of last year, when this was first introduced by Commissioner Russell back there, that the mandate was to explore the creation of a historical district, which goes to the issues that have been raised here by several people about don't just make the house historic, make the neighborhood historic. Amen. So that was the original proposal. Yet by the time that this came before the Historic Preservation Board in September, 3 months later, it was no longer, let's have a historical district for Coconut Grove. It was, let's have this new thing that we've come up with, this multiple property, whatever. And so that's the first problem. But that's an immediate problem in the scope of history. Yeah, let's be really candid about this. The reason why everybody's here today and the reason why this has now become such an issue is because of the racism in this community. Because there might be 50 of these houses here today, but there were hundreds of these houses back in the past. And all of them were destroyed. And all of, a lot of what was on Grand Avenue was destroyed over time. And nobody cared about the historical designation back then. And even 10 years ago, when Commissioner Sarnoff became the commissioner of this district, he went out of his way to screw the people in this community. So you have a real problem here to now, at this point, when you only have approximately 50, and if you could go back and bring back the image that you have with all the little red squares to understand this in a better perspective. Right there. Look at this. Way up here. Look at these from down here. So this is basically what you would say is a thematic situation. These are outliers. And if truth be told, if you go over here, you might find a couple of more of these little red houses. And if you go all over the city, you go find all of these little houses. Right? So it's a real problem for the people who own these houses to say, why are we being singled out when other people aren't being singled out? And there's this conflict between folks who want to preserve the house and the history. And I certainly agree with you, ma'am. Just because you don't know who I am doesn't mean that my family wasn't important. Everybody's family is important to them, right? Because none of us would be here without them. So there's a certain amount of respect that's owed to the people who came before us, just like we owe a certain amount of respect to the people that come after us. But the thing, and the only reason I've ever come here for this is the process. I've always believed that in the process it should be open and fair. And when you have, in July of last year, it was create a historical district or explore the creation of a historical district. Now you've got single out houses. Part of the story that I wrote today includes the fact that in Section 23, which is a historical preservation ordinance, there is language that deals with MIMO and the Biscayne Corridor about preserving the character of the district. There's no similar language for any of this. There's no language that says, let's preserve the historical character of this neighborhood, of this area. And in one case, you're treating white people who live up on the boulevard a whole lot differently than you're treating basically black people who live down here. Because the white people up there are getting, hey, it's the character of our neighborhood. It's the character of our district. Ain't nobody caring about, they're trying to reference character through individual houses. But up there, they had a big fight in City Hall at the last commission meeting over the tear down of a house and a building of an apartment building right behind Biscayne Boulevard, the next piece of property over. And there was another big fight about preservation of Morningside Park. Now they wanted to preserve Morningside Park and make that historical. Anybody ever talk to you about preserving Varick Park and making that historical? So I think, you know, you really need to focus this fight not only in the individual houses, but if you're concerned about your community, you got to fight for the community. You got to say, wait a minute, this is all crap, because you're picking us off one by one and you're putting us off against each other. Because this is a fight against people. The people who want to change the things, you know, like that lady there who wants to, you know, feels she has a right to sell her property, and folks that say, no, I want to preserve it for my kids or my grandkids. You know, everybody here is fighting against each other when everybody ought to be joining together and say, hey, we want to fight the people who put this shit together to begin with. First, you're a day late and a dollar short, and secondly, you know, look what you've done. You've put us against each other, and that's not right. So, one last thing. On my way here this afternoon, I was listening to the radio, and they're talking, you know, when we talk about hurricanes and sea level rise and all that, underneath us is an aquifer, right? We get our drinking water from here. We get all of our water from underneath us. Well, with the sea level rise, the salt water is slowly creeping west underneath us. And in Broward County, it's already gone 6 miles inland. All the underwater under Broward County, 6 miles in, is now being contaminated. And that's going to happen here. So people who talk about 100 years from now might not be here 100 years from now. Might not be here 100 years from now. So that's it. That's my say.
Okay, I think we can respond to a couple of points.
Okay.
And Warren, I don't know if you want to talk about the thematic versus historic-wide district. Some of the reasons for that.
We believe that, yes, a historic district here is probably the best way to protect the entire community. However, if we were to try and create a historic district here, every property within that boundary would be subject to Staff and Historic Preservation Board review. Whether it was built 80 years ago, whether it was built 20 years ago, whether it was built yesterday. So what we are trying to do, as you very rightly said, there are only about 50 of these properties left. That's what you said. So we are focusing in the most endangered, the most significant, and the most culturally significant properties within this community. And we believe these are the most important properties for this community at the moment, and the ones most under threat. So we are starting to try and protect the culture and the heritage of the community by protecting what we believe is most under threat at the moment, without creating an entire district and telling everybody that's within that boundary, you now have to come to the board to change your windows, you now have to come to the board. We're trying to do this by increments, and we were also asked by some members of the community to explore this. So this was partly by request by a few members of the community. So we were tasked to go out and identify the most significant buildings of this particular style, of this particular age, related to the history of the community, and these are the buildings that we come up with.
So, next, yeah.
Good evening. My name is Frank Schmidt, and I used to run the real estate program at the law school at the University of Miami, and I'm working with Cynthia and with Commissioner Russell as it relates to the CRA. I've not come to one of these historic preservation meetings before, and Cynthia asked me if I would come today to listen. And actually, I thought that what Ms. Chapman said was probably the most important thing that was said today, except that Al came across and added to it. And I think it's important when we talk about contributing and non-contributing structures and the way you keep things out and you make it consistent. And you know, I'm just a professor, so I call it a whole notebook full of stuff. And one of the things I do have with me is the July 27th adopted initial direction, July 17, 2017. And it said, this was passed by the City Commission, and it said, Whereas the neighborhood commonly referred to as the West Grove is a historically Bahamian, approximately 65 square block, half square mile section of Coconut Grove within the city of Miami that is generally described as the Coconut Grove Neighborhood Conservation District 2, and generally bounded by Douglas Road on the west, United States 1, Bird Road on the north, and McDonald and on the east, and Franklin Avenue on the south. It goes on to say, whereas the City Commission wishes to designate the area known as West Grove as a local historic district in recognition of the historical and cultural importance of the area, and the City Commission hereby approves and encourages and supports the designation as an historic district and the area known as the West Grove in recognition of the historic and cultural importance of the area. Now, I was involved with the whole effort in Little Havana for more than 2 years. I know what they went through to get the National Trust involved in an area that before 1959 wasn't Little Havana. I was involved with historic preservation efforts in other places out of Florida. But the key is, and I think Chapter 23 is very clear when it talks about how important MIMO is and how important the contributing and non-contributing buildings are. And so when you do that, you basically take away from the 65 square block area the real historic significance of the Black Grove. And the only way you keep out the non-conforming buildings is basically by deciding that it is a historic district and you have regulations over contributing and non-contributing buildings. And just go read Chapter 23. There is no historic preservation element in our neighborhood development master plan. Chapter 23 is all that we have. And it has clear language of the importance of MIMO. And clear language on the need, not only, and it actually deals with new construction. And the whole question of how you make it contributing to the ambience, the feel, the theme. And so all I'm saying is, I listen to all of you. You know, I'm a teacher. I listen. And what you're all saying is, this isn't what you want. What you want is a district. And you want to control the contributing and non-contributing properties. And I may be wrong. I see you shake head, you're wrong. But the reality of it is, if there's going to be new construction here, what is the theme? And if there's going to be one building on a street that is the history, maybe that doesn't have to happen.
We want a district.
So, if I may...
But I don't understand how we got from here to the thematic.
Politics.
So, if I may, I think Warren outlined how we got to thematic. There is some control pending as well on what does get built.
Did they reveal this?
No. So, if I may finish, there's going to be some relief in the Neighborhood Conservation District road as well, because of the thematic architectural standards that are currently only applied to the commercial districts and Charles Avenue. Those, I think, will be, and they're also currently only enforced by the Urban Design Review Board, which typically looks at much larger structures. We're going to have the HEP Board, which is used to applying standards similar to the MIMO standards for even new construction. They're going to be reviewing new projects, and that those standards will be applying for the entirety of the NCD2 area. So that's a new part of that proposed legislation.
July of 2017, how come I'm a property owner, I never got a notice?
That was separate. I think that was not anything to do with, that was asking the exploration of a historic district.
But when was it
So
actually decided?
that was HEP Board recommendation in...
Nope, in September.
Yeah, I'm sorry, September?
September.
I have to check.
I have it all with me. I have the whole.
Yeah, I think,
Notified as an owner. Never.
I think there was certified mail sent, and we can confirm, and I'm happy to look into that for you. Sorry. Has anybody else not spoken yet?
I have.
Okay, I'm sorry, yeah, you've been speaking, you've been waiting.
Let's get to the chat. If you were really concerned with the Bahamian heritage of this neighborhood, you would have gone to the old Bahamians who are still living here. The oldest of which is my mother, will be in a minute 94. You would have spoken to them about the heritage. Since her grandfather built over 127 houses in the Grove, another 30 down in South Miami, etc. But let's put that aside. Right now, we have the most houses on this list. But in the 80s, we had over 40 wooden houses. The city suggested that we knock them down and build brick houses, which we did. Now, all of a sudden, bingo, Jack Robinson, you want to preserve these houses. There are 17 new houses that are either just been finished or being constructed. They're all block houses. So if you want the neighborhood to believe you, stop the block houses. They're on the same historical streets that have these houses on this list, and we have the most houses. Most of these pictures are of houses we own. I thought you got them from my brother or something. So the point is, if you want the neighborhood to believe you, in a historic neighborhood, young lady said you have a house on Charles. Look, we got you by 105 years.
Sure.
Yeah, but no, but the point is, and there was no
Please,
financing.
if you could address.
There was no financing. Everybody had to save up their own little money and go to their cousin in South Carolina to buy these houses. There was no mortgages. The first mortgage given to a black person in this county is in 1955. Everybody else had to scrape their money together. So the skin in the game is different from yours when you came to bought the house 2 years ago. The point is this: you want the neighborhood to believe what you're saying, continue and really talk to the neighborhood. And also, as someone said, opt out. I'm not against this lady wants her house, you know, you can have it and whatnot. But to force people to be a part of this program without their consent, I don't know what's American about that. I don't know what's Southern about that. Stand your ground. You know, property is 5/5 of the law. The point is, you need to be fairer and more straightforward with this thing if you want people to opt in. And what is a development program with no money? Money's coming in a year. The neighborhood has not had a history of being dealt with fairly or people getting those things. Why did my great-grandfather have to work in the day and night? Because anybody could get off a boat and come to Miami with Homestead and get those 60 acres. Free! But he had to buy them. He had to buy them because he's a black guy. So the point is, let's be specific about the fairness of this program. There are 51 houses.
61. 62.
Okay, well, started out with 51. By my count, there's only about 5 people who are for it. Are there more? No, I mean officially, I mean publicly. You may have a list. Well, tell us, how many people are for it on your list?
We don't have a vote. I mean, how many people of which?
Who are property owners on your list are for it?
62.
Are for it. I mean, is it popular? I think you have a survey. You're pushing this thing. You're going to take people's property rights. Don't you think you should know how many people are for it? And when we're talking about this thing about the granny flats and all of that, we had a meeting at St. Paul's about the granny flat. Where in the neighborhood people for it, they're not going to build a granny flat. They're trying to preserve what they have now. That's for young millennials who want to come in here. The land price is high. They buy the high land price. Maybe they keep the current house for a while. But by throwing that granny flat, that makes the numbers work a lot better. So there's no neighborhood people who are really interested in that, as you heard at the meeting.
No, we heard a mix at the meeting.
You heard 3 people from the neighborhood that said they were for it. I can name them. You can write it down for you if you want to go and call them. They weren't for it. And many of the people who were talking for it, they didn't live in the neighborhood. They just people who came to the meeting. So we're in the neighborhood. We've been in the neighborhood for 128 years. And they're not going to go down without swinging. You know, so they scraped and like I said, he worked during the day and he worked with his wife holding the kerosene lamp at night
to save up money to buy property, in addition to his regular job. He had, every 5 workers, he had 1 worker to guard the mules that he bought, because the Klan used to come and try to kill his mules. That's the history of Coconut Grove. And someone said that they hadn't read it. They hadn't read it. It's around. He has a book. I just bought your book last week.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was who I was talking about when you said you didn't.
No, I didn't.
Yes,
you
you
didn't
did.
say his
At
name.
Armory Rest.
Sorry. Anyway, that's not the point. Your point is, let this thing be transparent. Give the people an opt-out. And if you want them to opt in, where I went to school, put some money down. Not money is coming in the future, a year from now, 2 years. Put some money down, and you'll get people who will probably be interested. You know, be fair. Be straightforward.
Sorry, you haven't spoken.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'm very grateful to everybody for opening my mind. I've lived in this neighborhood since 2005. My name is Michael March. I own a 4-unit property. It's on Charles Avenue, which is having a lot of attention now, which I'm very grateful for. I'm so grateful to see all these tour buses coming down the street. And I say that in a great way, because I love the placards there. There's a placard across from me that talks about the vernacular architecture. Only 2 out of the 4 on my corner are still left. Mine is 2 shotgun shacks there, a total of 4 units. But anyway, so I'm overall in favor of the attention and the preservation movement that's going on. And I think Charles Avenue is already a success story. Because, as the professor mentioned, there's new construction on my street, across from the historic cemetery, which will always be there. There's the 3 churches on Charles Avenue. So my point is, I think that Charles Avenue will always be a point on the tour, and I hope it always will be. And so the new construction that's being built across from the cemetery, it fits in. That's a zoning victory, in my opinion. It does look, if I'm allowed to use the term Caribbean island, I think it blends in. And in my opinion, they don't need to keep the attention on stopping us from, preventing us from making changes with our old houses. They need to keep the new people moving in to blend in with us, you know? So, and that's already happening. So, the University of Miami has attention in our neighborhood. They've started the new farmers market on Douglas Road and Grand Avenue, where my neighbors are selling food. It's great. I love being able to buy food from my neighbors. That's part of my neighborhood, okay? So another point that has been brought up is the young lady over here said, those of us who live in the neighborhood should have more of a voice. And that's true. Those of us who live in the neighborhood, we have to deal with the termites. We have to deal with, can we buy insurance at a reasonable rate? No. You know, can we make our homes comfortable? Are our options being limited? And so we're the ones who should have the vote. And my other neighbor here was kind enough to bring up the point, is there going to be a vote? And that's all I need to know is, those of us who own our homes, are we going to be able to vote? Because sure, there's a lot of people outside in the community who are interested in saving our community, and I think that's great. But when it comes down to the vote, those of us who live in the homes should have the vote. And I'm asking the Historic Preservation Board, will we have that vote? Whether we want to save that family, to save that house, to preserve our family history, or whether we want to be able to, as in my case, have my options open. I have no plans to tear down my house because it's zoned as a 4-unit. If I tear down, I can only build a single-family home. I like to get rental income, okay? So I'm going to keep, I love my house. That's the reason I bought it, okay? I have no plans to tear down, but I want, if I do tear it down, I want that to be my decision and not somebody else's decision. So my question is there going to be a vote?
There's not a vote, no. You can go to the Preservation Board meeting, obviously, and voice concerns, but Chapter 23 does not specifically allow for a vote.
And that, I disagree with that, because as this speaker said, this is still part of America. And when I bought my house, I didn't know everything, that there was still a separate but equal zoning policy for my neighborhood, because I came to learn that my street is called West Grove even though we're not that far west. I learned about the different neighborhoods, Center, North, South Grove. I thought we were all part of Coconut Grove, so I came to learn that there was a separate overlay just for the historic colored town than the rest of Coconut Grove, and I had a problem with that. And so I would like to pretend that I'm still part of Coconut Grove and part of America, and that if people want to be designated historic, it should include white neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, concrete homes, CBS homes, wooden homes. If anybody wants,
actually does. We have a number of historic districts that are white and black and concrete and
But not here.
Mediterranean revival, mission style, wood frame. So there are a huge amount of different districts within the city that reflect different architectural styles, different periods of history.
You know, just a tad bit of humor. You know, like you said, you didn't know certain things when you bought your home. You know what? I didn't know when I got a girlfriend I'd be the father of 8 either. Or boys or girls. But my question for you guys is this. Is planning and zoning operating independently from the governing bodies of the city of Miami, or are they responding to the request of developers to our representatives? Are you operating independently, or is our commissioner saying, yes, go ahead and do it? So is the planning and zoning, is the historic preservation, are all these bodies operating independently, or are you operating with our commissioner's blessing?
So there's criteria actually, or there's sort of a multi-step process. And at a certain point it becomes very analytical and independent of sort of outside influence. Like that first step saying, take a look at this, that is a political step. But once we are applying the historic preservation criteria, we're applying the law, and we're looking at those criteria, it becomes a very independent, staff-driven, analytical process. And I think to the point where I think some people were surprised by the number of these that we actually had remaining. I think there was sort of a thought beforehand that there weren't as many of these left. Yeah, there's sort of, it's a little bit of both, I suppose, is the answer.
So are you have the ability to override our governing bodies, the mayor and the commissioners?
No, they ask us to apply the law, and then in the course of applying the law, that's the result.
The law is the
law is the governing body.
Is the Miami 21 part of the law that you apply? Because if it is...
This is really chapter 23.
Okay, well, Miami 21 is for the preservation. When that was put into effect, it was a look at preserving this entire city of Miami, moving beyond the 21st century.
Yeah, but not, yes, but right. for the city, but not necessarily preserving buildings. Right. There is it refers to the historic preservation.
And the NCD 2, just throw that out and apply the principles of the Miami 21 that would preserve this community. And if you'd like to operate
sort of as a standalone document allows for redevelopment.
Right.
And it's only through chapter 23 that you're really preserving structures and
the spirit of Miami 21 would have not allowed one of these sugar cubes to be built in our community, because it doesn't add to preserving the integrity of our community.
To be fair, that NCD shouldn't necessarily, but the NCD 2 only applies to certain streets.
Yes.
And that's part of the issue.
Why did you change 20 houses to 62 houses?
Well, there wasn't a change. It was the ask was to look at buildings meeting these criteria. Once we looked around and found this buildings meeting the criteria.
Yeah, but the lost.
So that's where the discrepancy in the number comes in. There always has been 51 parcels, some of them on it. So that's where the discrepancy in this number comes in. We started with 51 parcels, we still have.
Let me ask, has anybody not been able to ask a question yet? And that wants to, that hasn't yet? Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a question about the chapter 23. The description of maintenance and repair requirements is really broad. And I just was wondering how that applies, historically, how that is enforced. Because, just looking at, some of the state of some of the homes, some of which are in limbo right now, they would probably immediately be fined, and I wouldn't want to see anyone lose their home over that or be forced to sell due to that, not immediately being able to make these repairs.
Yeah, generally we work with the code department, and they're the ones that will enforce the code as to when a property needs repaired or not. And they would be ultimately the ones that would determine if a building was unsafe or not. And until a building is declared unsafe, then the potential is it could be repaired.
Well, I understand the building code requirement, but the Chapter 23 historic code requirement appears much broader than that. It's almost like lack of weatherproofing, even paint peeling, even sagging, which many wooden homes have. It even mentions, some missing doors and windows, which I know, like the Mariah Brown house has no windows. Any of these homes are vulnerable to that immediately if this goes into effect.
I've not heard of any buildings being cited because of paint peeling and things.
It's in the code.
I think you'll find that a lot of these issues, normally what happens...
we're all in favor of maintenance and repair, but just the logistics of...
Normally, what would happen is, and what happens a lot is neighbourhood associations will come to us and say we're really concerned about this property. We as staff do not generally go out and enforce Chapter 23 like that. And that would really be code. However, if it's brought to our attention, then we will go out, we can speak to the property owners and see if there's any way we can advise and how to do it.
Are we,
It's important. So, to be clear, for everybody in this room, to be perfectly clear,
Stand up,
before we
Linda.
walk out the doors, when this comes back in front of the HEP board on July 3rd at 3 p.m. or whatever time they have it on the agenda, that's the end of the day. They're going to vote yes or no. Am I correct? We're going to have another public meeting like that here on Saturday, like this one today, to talk some more. But basically, on July 3rd, on the agenda for July 3rd, decide who's going to come up, the preliminary designations, and you're going to go back and present your report to the HEP board, and they're going to vote, and then the day is over. The people in this room have a 15-day window after that if they want to appeal the decision that day. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, I think everybody needs to understand that timetable in here, because that's a real timetable. You have a 15-day window. And I don't know if you include July 3rd when you're counting your 15 days or not. I have no idea. But I think you need to be clear about that. There's no voting. We can all do what we did before. Many people stood up in front of the HEP board and spoke for their feelings about this, whether they were for or against it. The majority of the people in the room, and the city has posted it on their website, but it's better on their Facebook page, and you can see all the conversation in the room that day. But at the end of the day, the HEP board, there were 8 people present, and they voted 8-0 to allow the preliminary designation to go forward. And that's where we find ourselves today. And the reason you didn't get a notice back in October or September, because they didn't have to give you a notice. When the day that Warren explained to the HEP board the brand new process of multiple property thematic designation, he and Chris Ruff explained that this was something that the two of them had come up with and written the wording to, and they wanted the HEP board to pass it, and the HEP board did pass it, and it went in front of the commission, so there was only 2 people there that day. Again, that's also on the website of the city, and it went in front of the commission on October 26th, and Ken Russell said 20 shotgun homes. There was nobody there at that commission meeting speaking on this item. I happened to be in that room. I heard the conversation of the commissioners. However, it did pass 5-0. It had a second meeting on November 16th, I believe. And it also passed. And so they didn't have to tell you anything until the HEP board, they didn't have to send you a letter until the HEP board meeting for April 3rd to let you know you are now on this list. And by the way, the third meeting that you all had, because we kept saying people didn't know about the meetings, your third meeting was in here on March 20th. But the moratorium started on March 18th. I don't know if you realize that.
Just to clarify, multiple property designations are carried out in other cities and on a national level.
Never
So
been done
I
here.
did.
Be honest, come on,
Chris
let's be
Rupp and
real.
I didn't.
No, that's what we, but please let him answer.
You know,
Please.
because
Please
you
let him
have stated something that's absolutely incorrect. Because these do exist in other cities and they do exist on a national level, so please don't
I said you wrote the wording for this city.
I wrote the wording for
Was
the
that
city
wrong?
based on
Because that's what it says in the video.
the wording and the legislation from the city is based on the National Park Service legislation, and that is really being
That's what Chris Rupp said in the video.
from the National Park
She was
Service.
clear, very clear, that the
So
two
we're
of you
clear.
had worked very hard coming up with the wording for the city ordinance. That's all I'm saying.
So we have one last comment. Yeah.
Yes, before we leave here, I just want to go back on, we talking about West Road, our community, so I think that we should focus more about the people in the community, because I know this is valuable access to people, but we talking about 51 parcels. We talking about 1,500 or more people being displaced that can't stay here in this community, that want to be in this community. What do we do to keep the people that's here, that want to be here, here? We talking about 51 homes.
Lily, we skipped over that since July of 2016.
No, I'm just saying.
You're right, I'm on your team.
Sorry,
Because we talking about, I heard in this room, we seeing people passing through, we seeing people that used to live here, that had homes here. I still live here. I wanna own a home here. I want my son right here, that's 11 years old, to grow up here. But how could we do that? There's nothing affordable for us to stay here. While we talking about 51, we want people to still be here. Let's talk about preserving a community. The people in this community in West Grove, the West Grove community. There are people that want to be here, that's willing to work here and put in work here. I'm talking about 40 years old. I'm not talking about 60 and 70 years old. That need to be passing the baton to people like myself and younger generations that want to still be